Well, good morning to all who have joined. Really excited to have my friend Wendy come in and talk today about a really important topic. So, Wendy Rentschler is the global head of corporate social responsibility and impact with BMC Software. And a big part of her role includes diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ESG and sustainability. And with all these things that she does, she still has time to be the UN liaison for BMC Software. A mom, I know, and a wife, so incredibly busy person, and we're very, very grateful to have you join us this morning. And we're going to talk about a really important topic, which is AI, but how really AI intersects ethics. And I am Shubhi Rao. I am the founder and the CEO, and I will be having this conversation as we all enter this AI era. A part of our UpLevel's vision, and my vision is truly how can women lead the AI era, not just participate in it. And so a big topic, obviously, that one has to consider as we move into this era is how do we do this in a very thoughtful, real ethical, and a way that we bring everybody along into the era. So my first question, Wendy, is what does it even mean when people say ethical AI? And why is that different than ethical data or ethical tech, or are there any differences?
No, I mean, I don't think overall. Okay, so first off, this is such a very, very big topic with so many like systemic implications. And just like, I think your first question could be an entire hour in itself. But the reason we discuss this is, and they all intersect one another, is because technology is awesome. I love tech. I've worked in tech for a long time, but tech is only as good as the information and data that it receives. And throughout the world, there are historically excluded communities, and there are systems of bias, and there are unethical decisions that happen, whether that's like in hiring, or who receives loans, or who gets into college, or promotion. And there's also a lot of subjectivity around what is great and what is good. And so technology can have the power to really change the game when it comes to making things more equitable in decision-making processes, whether it be personal or professional. However, a lot of that data is riddled with bias when it comes to, and if we are talking from just the implications from a hiring standpoint, for example, what we perceive internally in organizations is like what might someone be successful in a role is not what it was 20 years ago. We're definitely moving towards a skills-based economy, which I believe will help us become more equitable in our hiring. However, right now, current state, we're still in a very large transition mode where we're trying to make sure that representation matters globally, and we're trying to diversify all of our organizations, but it really comes down to requirements. So anyone that's on the call that's ever done an implementation before, the systems only work as well as the requirements that were written, right? And so what has happened now is algorithms and generative AI and data science have become really wonderful tools to streamline data sets that don't require a lot of objectivity. They're very, here's our benefits plan, and we can put a chat robot on it to answer questions for us in an artificial intelligence way because it understands the rules and requirements based on someone's country or location or what they're asking for in terms of like their healthcare benefits, for example. But now we're using these applications in ways that require a lot of human oversight, but human oversight historically has already been riddled and biased. So what has happened now is that we're hyperscaling discriminatory practices from hiring to internal development to just really any decision that involves a data point in someone's life. So I think the bigger question is, how do we use AI and generative AI in ways that make sense, that don't have large implications in someone's life? And on the side, figure out ways that we can continue to develop data sets that do not have or honestly just starting from scratch based on skills-based data sets versus indicative data-based data sets.
There's a great book written by Caroline Criado a few years ago, and she talked about just the lack of data. I think that is really the starting point. So, there's the second order issue that the data that we collect has biases. But why is that, right? And so it starts really just from the data gathering, the data collection. And most recently we put something out in terms of just this whole digital divide that exists between the number of men that are on the internet and publish and content relative to, well, there's something like 30% women who don't even have a device to have access to the internet. So that in itself is a problem. And then the women that do have access, their voices are less than, I forget, like 15% or something, really small, relatively speaking. So if we're not collecting balanced data, and
there's nothing to learn from. So Wikipedia,
there's nothing to even learn from.
Yeah, Wikipedia is a great example of this. And my call to action for anyone that watches this video, after I state this Wikipedia fact, is only 18% of the profiles on people on Wikipedia are people that identify as women. 18% of personal biography profiles are of women, 18%. That is startling, considering that we've consistently for thousands of years been 50-50 for the most part, like 48-52, but there is quite a bit of more balance in like the overall population. So to your point, why is that? And I think I know the way that we use the internet sometimes can be different from a generational standpoint. I'm one of the oldest millennials in the world, and then we have Generation Z, and then we have baby boomers. The way that the internet, specifically and distinctively to their gender role, is a lot different. But Generation Z, who I live for and worship, are really, I feel, using it more equitably. One, because they're digital natives, but two, when we start talking about women being left behind, for example, or those that identify as women being left behind in the generative AI space, I don't know anyone under the age of 27 that's not using ChatGPT in a day-to-day cadence in their job. It's just a really easy thing to do. It's easy. It simplifies a lot of what writing a tweet, for example, which might have taken you an hour, can now take you like less than 3 minutes. Those type of things are really helping. But how do we get people that aren't digital natives, that identify as women, to start using these tools more readily? And therefore, we will have more information to have more objective decisions and have better data sets.
Mm-hmm. And so you're right. One part of it is just the balance of the data sets. But then the other is today, when you think about these large LLMs, whether that's from Microsoft or from Google or others, have been trained on that everything that's on the internet, right? So the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then, when you have these data sets that have that good, the bad, the ugly, if you don't have really great moderation tools to take out some of that, the racist language or the sexist languages or all those kind of things, it just self-perpetuates, because then you start to create all the synthetic data. And so, you start to think about, well, then will the world start to use those models as a baseline to create more cleaner, ethical models to reflect the application, whether that application is for gender, or that application is for healthcare, or the gender application is for, will we start to migrate into a world, for example, if it's HR and it is really an AI tool to look at resumes, then do we have that ethical responsibility to look at the underlying data to really make sure it's balanced? And how do you do that? And who does that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the inclusively digitizing the employee experience is really what I'm extremely passionate about from like a professional standpoint. And we spoke earlier about skills. So at a previous employer that I worked at, I did lead talent acquisition, and there was clear decision-making processes that had inherent bias in them. Once they would go through the screen with the recruiter and then get to the hiring manager, sometimes you would get feedback that would be inconsistent. This male candidate, he got a 90 on the skills assessment test. That's awesome. Well, what a female would get it? Oh, she must have had help. Like, how would she know that? So one, that's a human element. That's you as a human having a coaching conversation. AI cannot have a coaching conversation. It's never going to be just AI making decisions at the beginning part. But what we then did was talk about, we had the crucial conversation, but then we really started speaking about skills. So we transitioned a lot of our hiring process to skills based. Like, what are the core skills of a business analyst job per se? VLOOKUPs, pivot tables, situational judgment testing, which is scenario-based testing, those type of things. So anyone that applied immediately got the assessment. It didn't matter what their resume said. If they applied, they immediately got the assessment. If they got over the baseline average score that we tested our current employee population with, of like, let's say 80, we automatically called them. And then from there, we had a little more rigor in the interview, unless it was an entry-level role. And we would hire anyone in the entry-level role that passed the assessment. And then, of course, the next question would be like, how would you know it was them in the assessment? Well, we would record them during the assessment. They would have like they would show their ID during the assessment and whatnot. And you know what? We were able to reduce, literally get rid of racial stratification, gender stratification amongst roles, and have a more equitable, representative pipeline early on in career for succession. Obviously, it gets a little more complicated the more senior you get into roles. However, there is an opportunity to use AI from just a ability to reduce, getting through resumes and whatnot, because that can be a very large task, but just doing it on skills based. One of the largest corporations in the world that used to sell books originally is the perfect test case and example of this. You might be a Prime member. And they did 10 years of this. And within a matter of like, I think a day or a couple of days, their algorithm immediately became sexist in their practices and only targeted like male candidates. Like, it preferred male candidates because they were using their own information. So it was 10 years of resumes of what was a star candidate. And so that's what the algorithm just learns what you tell it to learn. And if all you have are males that went to this specific college and like we're in this specific fraternity, the system picks that up. It doesn't know what's male and female per se, but it understands the social cues that are representative on a resume. So that's, again, when you go back to skills based. I need someone that knows Golang and uses Jira project management software. And then from there, you can start to have like more high level or like high touch conversations. I think that is just one big way we can start to move the needle from a hiring perspective, as an example.
Mm-hmm. And I think you touched on something which is also really important as we think about truly being not just ethical and thoughtful, is how do you also address people from different backgrounds, different races, different cultures? So, if you just over-index and train the algorithm in a certain geo or with a certain cohort, it doesn't necessarily scale. So you have to really be thoughtful from day one as you're building these data models, that you're getting, you truly, it is representative of the population you're going to serve.
And we have so much data out there. I think like we all like talk about data, and there's more data in the world than we'll ever use. We probably only use, I think, like 2 to 3% of the actual data that we collect overall as a world. So like, what data do we actually need? Like, what are the implications of what we are trying to do? Like, what is our end goal when we're building whatever AI system it is? A lot of times when we maybe purchase software as an organization, and this is just like a blanket statement, we like turn everything on. Do you really need everything? Do you understand like the ethical implication of like what everything might mean for whatever outcome it is you're looking for based on this product? Now, if we look at some of the social media we use, they use like contextual AI. So they might want everything because their entire business model is based on advertising revenue streams.
Right.
So, they're like where you live and like what you Googled and like you just bought this hat, like here's 10 other hats that you might like in a bag, like all these different things that uses that contextually. But we've seen in the past and still today, like how that information can be used against people and can be used to change markets and politics. So there is again, what is the purpose and what are we trying to do? Are we trying to drive revenue and be an ethical company that people connect on our platforms? Yes. Then like, let's streamline like the information that we're collecting, and like, let's make it very clear what we do as a business and why we exist, versus having a free-for-all, which is when a lot of problematic situations happen all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, just in the chat, Corey has a great comment, which is, we keep returning to the question of what do we need to know when considering what information to gather from our users for this reason.
Yes, exactly. What do we need? And when we think about, I think the original reason we're having this conversation is, how do we get more representation online? The call to action I was going to have earlier is, go write a Wikipedia article about a female leader or someone that you're inspired by that might not be on there. But that's what we do. We add like more information onto the internet. We like encourage people to participate. It is a systemic issue that goes back thousands of years of why certain demographics might not participate in things, from like healthcare to the internet. But what I do know is that being a woman, being born as this woman, like, I was always told that, technology, these types of things were like out of my grasp. Now, I think I have oppositional defiance disorder, so I just do whatever people tell me not to do. And so I really got into tech, but that's not, there is a study that's very commonly referenced that the military did, and it basically was a confirmation by a study around like why women need to be in certain roles, which has been debunked for like at least 15 years now, but it still continues to be referenced, right? We continue to have these narratives that, women can't play parts in these roles. But hey, Mira Murati is the woman that created ChatGPT. She wrote ChatGPT. She wrote ChatGPT. The first computer programmer was a woman. Hidden Figures and mathematicians that got people to space were women. And women have been very astute in mathematics for a long time, only until, recently, if they had access to education. And it was a very, gender mixed type of role. And I think, with knowledge is power. And when power is perceived in systems, we figure out ways to make sure people don't have that power anymore. And so we're not just trying to solve like the future and like current state, but trying to unravel thousands of years of systems, which I have a lot of children, and I hope that in their lifetime they have more equity. And I do see more equity. As I mentioned earlier, like I referenced Generation Z, they are
Mhm.
they are not taking any prisoners. They are, quitting if they are not feeling like they're having like the work-life balance that they need. They are truly all of our heroes in the millennial and Gen X space, in terms of like, I have one life to live. I can't get, time is the one thing I can't get back. And how can I make sure that I'm doing right for the planet? And why ESG is taken off so much is because they only want to do business with organizations that are demonstrating these values. They only want to do business with organizations that are showing representation and like prioritizing inclusion to drive innovation. And I can say from a BMC example, every person that we interview asks about that. And I'll be in feedback sessions and people will tell me, I took the job there because I saw all of the work that you're doing to try to advance, not me, BMC overall, to advance representation across the board. So I do think there is a bit of self-correcting that's happening with Generation Z just because of their digital native state, but they have a lot ahead of them. We have a lot ahead of us in terms of how we think about these ethical tech considerations and like what we're applying them to. And we've already seen it go off the rails so many times. In the United States, we don't have as much regulation, but in other parts of the world, there's quite a bit of regulation, which then impacts us in the US. So I know that was a long answer, but yeah. I think that
Well, you said something again, which is another important consideration as we think about AI and ethics in ESG. I think they intersect as we think about the sheer computational power And when you look at what's happening with water around the world, it's going to be our most precious. It is our most precious resource. And with each day, with what's happening to the planet, it feels like that water situation is getting even more tenuous. But when you then start to think about what that means, when we look at all these big data farms that we have and server farms that we have, and each prompt takes up so much computational energy, and now you have millions of people using this. And so that's another thing that we need to think about is on one side of the coin, we do want to enable technology, we want to move. We're humans, progressing is in our nature, we do need to do that, but how do we do it in a way that we're this beautiful planet and we don't destroy this planet along the way?
Yeah, and that's such an important conversation. I was reading something last night online when you had texted me, and I was just reading around. Things changed so quickly, and I'd been off work last week, so I was like, let me make sure nothing has happened that I need to reference contextually for this conversation. But one of the things I was reading was, when crypto came out, and this is, also more like a systems overall conversation, but there was such this heightened concern around all of the energy that crypto was using for data mining, which I don't disagree with. However, I think those concerns were also fueled, like forensic accounting is an extremely powerful tool. Like when you start to see why one thing might be important and why another might not be important. And when crypto came out, obviously that was such a large conversation around sustainability. But then if you think about it, like so many big banks were really wanting to destabilize that market. So that narrative comes out, but now we have Chat GPT and the other generative AI solutions out there. And you really don't hear a lot about that as much, but it is, and I think the conversation is starting to bubble up more, but it is extremely concerning with the amount of energy that it takes. Now, there are energy solutions. I was at Climate Week last year in New York, the UN Climate Week last year, and I was in the private sector forum where they talk about, a sustainable future, like in order for us to move forward as humans, like the earth is going to be here. I think that's a misnomer. People always are like, there's no planet B. And that I love that, but the planet's going to be here. We won't be here. That's the thing we really need to like change our mindset around. She's going to be here. We're not going to be here. So we need to really talk about how we transition our energy to fuel these high computational, and we need to figure out ways to eco-design these algorithms as well. That power is out there to be able to eco-design, but we need to make sure that programmers, that's just a part of their learning or self-learning, that they understand like eco-design concepts, and that they have the ability to understand or maybe even leverage their products and only work with only have their products on servers and platforms that are using renewable energy, because those solutions are out there. We have to have a market to demand it. And honestly, maybe generative AI is the market to really help the entire world transition to a more renewable future.
I agree. I think because a lot of companies like UpLevel that are in these unique spaces that deeply care, if you will, broadly about the ESG agenda, are already starting to ask the question, how can I do this in a more ethical way? How can I do this in a more planet-friendly way? Because if I were to just leverage what the big tech has out there, that's going to take us down a path that is probably not going to be super friendly to the globe. So I think, like you said, maybe this is going to be a grassroots movement where the younger, more newer startups should lead this movement.
Yeah, and if
we don't have the legacy tech. We're not sitting on billions of dollars of investments, right? We don't have.
And also too, a lot of the legacy tech companies, they're buying these newer companies, and they don't want to, you don't want to don't break what's not, don't fix what's not broken, right? You just want to buy it, lift it and shift it and like bring in the revenue, right? So yeah, there's certainly that opportunity. And just as a side note too, when we think about climate change, my job has all of these different things under the umbrella of social impact, but that's because they're all intersectional to one another. Climate change most adversely impacts women and children.
Yes.
And so it's not only as important to have that conversation because of up level and like what the mission is, but we have to make sure all the solutions we provide to bring more women to the table on the, having representation on the internet, using these tools to streamline their own jobs and lives is important, but that we're using green solutions to do it. I love Etsy. Like if you ever go on to Etsy.com, at the bottom, they have like, we are 100% renewable energy, like on all of their software and how they do it and farm it and everything. So
Yes.
I love things like that. That makes me want to go back. And I have since then, like I try to use that platform now to buy anything that I can when I'm buying gifts globally.
I agree. They all intersect, and they're intersecting much faster than they ever did. So, one of the rhetorics that's out there, and it's a pretty, each, and part of it is just, of course, it's a topic and probably media loves to run with it, is as we transition more into the AI era, and it's really disproportionately going to impact jobs for women, because probably many of those jobs just lend to automation, and AI would be a much inexpensive and efficient tool, let's just say, for argument's sake. But I also think just what we're talking about, and again, coming from our own experience with UpLevel, is finding really great experts who really know how to guide companies or organizations from an ethical perspective. Like that's a whole new role, right? It's not like, you're a millennial, I am a Gen X, and we were not trained, right? Like there are not a lot of, so I think there are going to be some really interesting jobs that are going to emerge in the future as we really start to ask these questions. Like maybe there are going to be women and men who will be who will have to start to think about intersection of water and gender, or climate and gender, or climate and water. Like there are going to be all these, but then development of tech, or just specialization just on the data side. I think there are going to be some really interesting jobs that will emerge, and part of me then says, well, how do we get them ready? How do we get ourselves ready? And upskill for this world that we're rapidly being crawled into.
Well, the conversation, or the note that you mentioned earlier around how AI is going to take quite a bit of jobs. I use ChatGPT every single day, all the time. It has helped me, honestly, go from working over 40 hours a week to getting closer to 40 hours a week. But it certainly doesn't make my job disappear. So for instance, we have our social impact and ESG, our corporate citizenship and ESG impact report that we do every year. And all of the knowledge is like really in my brain and then like all over the internet. And I certainly use other resources within BMC to do it, but it's 68 pages and I am not a gifted writer. That is not where my strong suits are. And so ChatGPT and Grammarly together have been a game changer for me. Great. I've had Grammarly for like 4 years, but ChatGPT has been a game changer for me because it's not right. I'm not copying and pasting what ChatGPT writes, but it helps me like collect my thoughts. So, how can we like explain in 250 words BMC's relationship with the UN Global Compact and why that is important as a responsible business? It then writes 250 words. It's not going to all be correct. It's not going to all be right. Some of it's clearly written from a computer, but I have a place to start. I have a draft to start with. It's streamlining my job. You have to have human oversight for so many of these things. Like contextual AI, I think sometimes people get that confused with, well, it's gonna understand everything contextually and be able to write something. No, contextual AI can take, like, you live here and it's 95 degrees outside and you probably are looking for a portable air conditioner right now, like from a retail perspective. But contextual AI is not going to be able to have been sat in all of our senior leadership team meetings, understand our ESG or like corporate strategy, and be able to take that 250 words and turn it into something meaningful. That would have taken me hours to do. It took me about 45 minutes to do now. These tools are meant to streamline our work, and we already work so much already. If you think about what a job was, I remember when I started my career, we were still like on paper, like intra-office envelopes. Okay, the internet existed, and I was like the only person that used it in several of my situations that I worked in. But intra-office mail was still around. When you left work, you left work. There was, no one had email on their device. In my first job, you didn't have that. Like, you just went home. And yeah, things have definitely changed, and like we all work in a global economy now. But I feel like, again, like these generative AI tools are really just kind of helping balance out more. But to your point, Shubhi, how do we make sure people use them like that versus getting scared off by these articles that get thrown around on LinkedIn and Forbes, or like all these different social medias and press outlets that make up these new, quiet quitting, fast sleeping, whatever it is today, and then AI is going to take your job. That's not helping anyone.
Mhm.
Let's help people by like, hey, here's like 7 prompts on how to use ChatGPT if you're doing a social media campaign, or if you're a small business. One of my really good friends, she owns a restaurant. She's a restaurateur. She owns like 3 of them in Houston. And she'd heard about ChatGPT, but a lot of people aren't taking the next step to go look and play with ChatGPT. All you have to do is sign up and ask it a question. It's Google on steroids. That's all it is. It's deep learning. And I just showed her, I was like, explain to me in 150 words, Nobi's restaurant in Houston, Texas. And it pulled everything from all corners of the internet and put 150 words in. It wasn't 100% accurate, but she was like, whoa. And then I said, and look now, make 9 tweets with a call to action to come to Nobi's. And then it made like 9 tweets with a call to action to come to Nobi's. That would have taken a really, really long time. And her social media person, she actually uses ChatGPT now, and she's able to manage multiple accounts. It didn't take away her job. It made her help a small business have more content out there.
Yeah. And that's that's one of the things that we are working really hard on up level to do, is to really help women to come into the platform and use these various AI tools. I mean, they're on an AI platform wanting, and our goal is to not chat GPT, but there are some incredible women-led startups in the femtech space. And so, and that whole LLM is trained purely on women's health data.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to hallucinate, and it's not going to do crazy things, because it's just pure, clean women data. And so, how do you use highly specialized tools for specialized applications where you probably don't want to go to ChatGPT and ask questions, let's say on breast cancer, but for
But if I'm a doctor, I could go to ChatGPT and give me 10 tips that I can give my patients on how to, do preventative breast cancer maintenance.
Yeah, and so I think what I'm saying is these physicians are now creating their own medical chat GPTs, if you will, that's just purely on their data. So it goes back to being very ethical, because if I'm a woman, I don't want, that's the problem with chat GPT. So it has this real positive, but the other side is anything you put in there is going to leak into the internet. So you have to be very careful. And this is what many companies are saying, that they're not allowing you to use chat GPT at work for the reason.
Well, we're allowed to use chat GPT at work, but to your point, like ChatGPT is not somewhere where you're going to like copy and paste your code that's broken and fix it, because that's what's been going on. That's a common sense issue. That is not a ChatGPT issue.
Right.
You should know, it clearly says that anything that you put into the model is going to be used. And that's another opportunity, another call to action is for putting gender representative narratives into that model. That's how it learns.
That's right.
I use it more for like a practical business standpoint.
Correct.
But that's not very like gender, it's just a gender neutral. But putting in just practical things, but you don't want to put in proprietary information like
That's right.
I think one was someone put in like the meeting notes at like a very high, big electronics company and was like, copy and pasted meeting notes in there and was like, make an outline for me that I can follow back up with. And so then everyone kind of had this large electronic company's information because they put it in there. Don't do that. Like, do it
Yeah.
for high level things to get you started. And that's the kind of beauty that I love with a lot of the people that are going to university now, is they're using it for that. You know, all these professors were up in arms like they're cheating and whatnot. And every person I ever asked that had these very broadband statements. I was like, have you ever used ChatGPT before? And they were like, no. And I'm like, then how can you make rules about something you don't know anything about? That's an opportunity. And then just like showing people on the phone, like, this is how easy it is, and this is what it is. I clearly would not turn this in as a paper.
Yeah. And we need those kind of tools to go global. So, let's say markets in Southeast Asia versus markets, on different continents will probably need responses that make better sense for their culture and their markets than overly generic. So yeah, but it's exciting, and as we embark on this. However, at the same time, like you said, you have to be super thoughtful about what it is, because that's the whole synthetic training, right? Like, so now it gets data and then it retrains itself on that data.
I mean, I'm just like, you don't go and put your social security number in a ChatGPT, like.
Yeah, but Brian, we should
like,
be doing that.
Why would you put any? Don't put things in like that, or into any of the other generative AI tools, which there are so many. And I encourage anyone that's watching this to check out, and I will give a leave behind for Shubhi to push out on the platform and on your social media channels. But there are like, this generative AI is just a supplement. It's a tool. It's like email. When Office Outlook came out, when Excel came out, people were like, oh, they're going to take accountants' jobs. We need more accountants more than ever now. We need attorneys more than ever now. We need human oversight into these things. This is not taking away anyone's jobs. It's transitioning jobs. It's taking individual contributor work that was boring and people were going to leave that job anyway for, and giving everyone an opportunity to have more strategic roles. And that's something that was really needed in this current market, because the top 3 reasons people leave a job are their manager, money, and lack of knowledge, access, and opportunity to be on different projects. Like, the newer generation that's coming to the workforce, they don't want to do the same thing, but push the same button over and over and over again. So these generative AI tools are giving them the opportunity to do the work that they already have, but then to also be like more strategic in the work that they do. And that is the beauty of this. And so like, when we hear like these scary stories, I mean, it's just that the news is a whole nother problematic topic we could talk about. But I agree that we definitely need to get more women, or people that identify as women, involved in these tools, so that the data sets can be more representative of like their influence and of their perspectives.
That's exactly, you brought me right to Up-Level Genie, because that's exactly what we're trying to do with Up-Level Genie on Up-Level, which is a data set for women, and actually have the GPT model for women. But one of the things, just going back to the broader generative AI, is, majority of it are good actors, but there are also equally bad actors who have figured this out, which is, the more stuff I can dump into this, the algorithm is going to start to get skewed to whether it's right or left or whatever it might be. So there are obviously armies of people who are also busy, trying to skew the algorithm. So that's one thing. And that is one thing I do worry about, because at some point, does it become so unwieldy that it's difficult to moderate something that massive?
I would say like scientific literacy is something globally our education systems need to invest in more. When I was growing up, we went to the library and we learned about the Dewey Decimal System and like referencing material before we repeat it or write it down, and having like references. And I'm always really shocked about how many people don't know about like Google Scholar, for example. Like, I use Google Scholar all the time. You just Google Scholar, and then you can look up like research papers. and like having evidence-based peer-reviewed data and research. We don't do the service that we should to our, like our children and young adults around like teaching them scientific literacy or the ability to be able to decipher. And candidly, a lot of my friends that are not in the same space that I'm in, but I grew up with, and like their lives went in different directions and they don't have this strong digital literacy, have said to me candidly that the internet, when they kind of go off on something that I'm like, that's not true or whatnot, they'll say candidly to me, there's so much on the internet, I don't know what's real and what's not real, because they didn't start participating online until they were like 35, 45. And that is where I think there becomes a lot of opportunity to like re-educate, but then where is the line of when like it's just we're lost and we need to focus on like those that we can help understand like scientific literacy more, and how do we add scientific literacy into the standards? Like when you go to like ChatGPT, for example, it's very, when you read all of the information, it will tell you like what they're using it for. Anything you put in, like it's not accurate up until, or it doesn't have data after 2021, reading the information. There's certainly like a lot of opportunity for that.
And one thing you'll see, right? Because, and I don't think that's ChatGPT's fault, but again, going back to really ethical, etc. It will often share with you a citation or a source, but you click it and it goes nowhere.
Yeah.
Or oftentimes it will give you a source, but then when you double click into the source, because anybody can publish anything on the internet, it may not even be a statistically significant sample size. But they're like, we surveyed, I don't know, my dog and my neighbor and my husband, and the survey said, and so you to really be, it is you need to just really understand some of these things. You can't just take it at face value. Versus if you went to the library and you got the book and you got the reference, it was so much. It's such a different.
Right.
And
scientific literacy too, you kind of just see this bubbling up everywhere in terms of just the different news lines that you read. When I referenced earlier, like the quiet quitting or the sleepy worker or whatever the new trend is, when you start to look at their sample sizes or their sample population, it's executives or like this 100 top CEOs. Don't get me wrong, I love my executive leadership team and they have extremely important jobs, but some of them I would not be the people I would ask about, the human capital forecast. They get a high level view of that, but they have to get a high level view of 200 data points within our business. So they're probably not someone that needs to be a part of that sample size. You need to ask the people on the ground what they are actually saying about trends in hiring or what they're seeing or return to office or whatever the topic is. A lot of times the things that we find online are just not factually accurate, or it's a headline to grasp. And that in itself also lends itself to like the harm that happens within gender representation, because all of these headlines you mentioned before around how they talk about AI is going to take, women's jobs. Some people are going to internalize that, and then it's going to actually manifest for them, and that's unfortunate because it's not true, but people sometimes just believe what they read.
Yeah. So as you, for somebody who's in this space day in and day out, and you fast forward and you look at 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how do you think it gets better from AI and ethics perspective, or sort of steady state, or in pockets? How do you see this evolve?
I think from a global perspective, overall, this will move global workforce trends forward. Just for like the last 7 years, skills have been something we've talked about. Future of work before COVID was something I often talked about, and like helping companies like strategize 5 to 10 years what they would do, and like COVID did it over a weekend. And I think that generative AI will do something similar. And to your point, there's bad actors, but there's bad actors everywhere all the time on any topic, from like baby formula to generative AI. Like there's always someone out there trying to make a quick buck. and harm someone. And that's unfortunate. And again, we need to always be bear aware. But from the next 5 to 10 years, I think generative AI will hopefully push to more sustainable energy resources, because we'll have to. I mean, like, there's only a finite amount of resources available. We can't destabilize any more countries. There's no more, and because in those countries there's our future workforce, because we don't have, the population evenly dispersed throughout the world. Like, we have to be more mindful, we have to be more global, and I think generative AI will help us from a sustainability perspective. I think it'll also help us drive the skills conversation, which itself naturally balances out the representation. Like, when we really just start focusing on skills, or like very like specific nuanced requirements of what we're trying to accomplish in whatever software it might be, that is going to help us drive forward more equitable practices. I think the third thing that we can all do, though, is really just take the time to explain how generative AI is a positive thing for all of us, but you have to be wary and you have to use it responsibly. And then making sure that we do business with organizations that are demonstrating how they are taking ethical tech considerations into practice, encouraging or yourself putting more content online about women, like adding more women to Wikipedia, like adding more women voices across all workflows is going to help the conversation. But I think also having a positive spin will actualize it to be a more positive thing.
I agree with you. I think there's more positivity than negativity, but I don't know the severity of the negativity. But overall, I remain optimistic as well.
Yeah.
But with that, I wanted to find out if we have any questions and thoughts for Wendy or for me. But this was a great session. I know we could have covered so many things, but
I was like, those questions that you sent me, I was like, wow, each of these questions is an hour in itself. But
I know, I think I hit the first 2 questions. So we have many more living rooms in our future.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I don't see that there's any more questions, but Shubhi, thank you so much for
Thank you.
asking me to do this session. I will follow up with you with resources that maybe you can share on UpLevel to drive more women to use generative AI, so we can get like
absolutely, yeah. And maybe we could do a session at some point just using different generative AI.
I think that's like a really great idea. Yeah,
like more.
Yeah,
a workshop.
A workshop, absolutely. And thank you for what you're doing with UpLevel. Making a space for women by women is so important.
Thank you, Wendy. Again, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for your time. We know how busy you are, so really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. And thank you for all who joined.
Yes. Thank you all so much.
Right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye now.